Coming up, 5 teams are left in the Google Lunar X Prize.
4 planets are seen for the first time. I interview Jim Adams, the former Deputy Chief Technologist at NASA.
And I'm in at least 2 segments of this particular episode. All of that and more coming up on this episode of Tomorrow.
Good morning. How's everything up in the sky?
Welcome back, not just to me, but to you and everybody else. Jared's here, Mike's here, Dudda's here. I don't care about Ben, he's in the next room, it's fine. Anyway, welcome to Orbit 10. This is episode 4 for January 28th, 2017. And of course, the first thing we want to do is give a huge shout out, and I promise I won't scream this time, to our Escape Velocity patrons. These are the people who have contributed $10 or more to this particular segment of this particular episode. It's just so much fun to say it that way. It's like you have to over-articulate and make sure you get all of the words out. I'm giving you a little extra time to make sure you can find your name on the screen. If you are interested in getting your name on this particular screen and subsequent screens, you can always head over to patreon.com/TMRO. Eh? What's that? It's almost like I prepared for this or something. I didn't. In any case, like we always like to start off the show with a couple of launches. Thankfully, we can always start the show off with a couple of launches. Mike,
Absolutely.
What have you got for us?
Oh man, so the first one is actually a launch out of Japan, and unlike last week with that failed experimental launch, this one was totally successful and definitely a much bigger rocket. This is their H2 rocket, so let's check out the launch footage. Now, this launch actually took place on Tuesday, January 24th at 7:44 Coordinated Universal Time from the Tanegashima Space Center in southern Japan. And it technically was a commercial launch for the DSN Corporation, but the payload was an X-band communications satellite which will provide service to the Japanese military until 2030. Now, the payload is called DSN-2, and actually DSN-1 hasn't even launched yet. It had a failure last year when it was being shipped around. But in any case, when it's entered service, it'll be renamed Kirameki 2, and that's kind of a tradition that Japan has to rename their satellites once they enter orbit and enter into service. And since the whole, it being for a military customer, JAXA and Mitsubishi Heavy Industries didn't provide any footage of the launch or any live broadcast, so the footage you saw was from a Japanese news station. So in any case, still congratulations to Japan for their first successful launch of the year, and it's always awesome to see their H2 launches. So
one of the interesting things I've realized that after watching all these different launches is not only do each of the rockets, of course, look a little bit different and what have you, and depending on where they're going, you know, those launches look different, and night look different than daytime and all that other fun stuff. But I realize that camera work has like a huge impact on the way that we perceive the launch. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So somebody was like, oh, that's a really aggressive turn. And all I could think was, well, maybe it is, but maybe it's just the camera guy was like falling asleep a little bit. Like it could have been anything, right? Anyways, and we have another one. Yes, Soyuz, is that correct?
Yes, and this one was live broadcasted, so we have quite a bit better footage. And yeah, this was actually for Arianespace. So let's check out the launch for this.
You can tell it was live because of the static.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on with the cell for that one there, but now this was actually Friday night, technically Saturday morning on January 28th at 1:03 Coordinated Universal Time from French Guiana, and this was the Soyuz ST-B, which is a upgraded Soyuz 2-1B which is only used commercially for launches in French Guiana, and the payload for this was Hispasat 36W-1. 1. Not a very inspiring name, but in any case, it's a telecommunications satellite for Hispasat, which provides Spanish and Portuguese services to Spain, Portugal, the Canary Islands, and South America in a geosynchronous stationary orbit. And I just love the footage that they provide from this, and the views are getting better and better. And thankfully, at this very critical moment right here, where the third stage separates from the second stage, they didn't have any problems like the Soyuz has been having, and I'm assuming because this one has a little bit more quality control with it being a commercial launch for Arianespace. And as you may remember, last year we kind of couldn't decide whether or not to count launches like this for Russia or for Europe. And Lisa Stojanowski was able to find that you were able to, it counts for Europe because it was from the French soil, from French Guiana, and Arianespace is the primary operator. But in my mind, to kind of also like count towards Europe, is Russia is a part of Europe. So this is just a very awesome example of European cooperation. It was a Russian rocket being launched by the European Space Agency, specifically Arianespace, for a Spanish telecommunications company. So that's, I think, is a really cool example, and definitely count that for the first launch towards Europe this year. So
yeah, that's really
very cool to see the first launches from Japan and Europe this year.
See, now we need like a tally board in the back. And just so we can be like, and then
Yeah,
we can
here we
debate.
go.
Right, exactly.
And we'll like flip it over.
Exactly. That's awesome.
That'd be awesome.
It reminds me of volleyball in middle school for me. I know, I'm 5'4", I played volleyball. It was only for a semester, it's fine. Mike, you have some other interesting news talking about the moon. Tell me more.
Yeah, so this is some news from the Google Lunar X Prize.
Perfect.
And with this, they had a deadline at the end of last year, December 31st, as to how many teams would be able to continue to proceed in the competition because they had to have a verified launch contract by the end of the year. And 5 teams have been selected for this. And the first one is Moon Express. They actually had a verified launch contract in 2015. They're going to be launching with New Zealand's Rocket Lab, so that's pretty cool. The second one was Space IL, which is the Israeli team, and they're going to be launching with SpaceX. They have quite a bit of funding from a little bit from the Israeli government and from quite a bit of private investors as well. So that's really cool. And then Synergy Moon is the third team, and this was just back in August of last year, 2016, and they're going to be launching with interorbital systems. And the rocket that you see on screen is going to be clustered together, kind of OTRAG style, to have something big enough to be able to launch a small rover to the moon. So I'm really excited to see how their progress is, since it's all kind of a grassroots project, and have team members from all across the globe for that. But in any case, the fourth team was Team Indus from India, and they got their launch contract verified on December 1st of last year. So just kind of right there close to the deadline. And they're going to be launching with the Indian Space Research Organization. They're going to be using a PSLV rocket to launch their lander to the moon. And they're going to have their own rover that they're going to take on that lander, but they're also going to be taking another team's rover. This is Team Hakuto, which was barely got their launch contract verified on December 20th with partnering up with Team Indus to be able to launch their rover along with theirs. So that's very cool. And unfortunately, there was another team, part-time scientists from Germany, that announced a launch contract in November of last year, but was unable to get it verified in time. However, one really cool thing that the Google Lunar X Prize has done is they are splitting a $1 million purse prize to all of the teams that have participated so far to kind of give them a little bit of a kickstart so that they can continue on with their operations. And some of them that have commercial plans, like Astrobotic, for example, plans to land several people's rovers and kind of landing experiments and things like that commercially. And Moon Express is doing that as well. But you know, I think that that's really cool of the Google Lunar X Prize to dish out that money to all the teams that haven't been selected, so that they can continue going. And I'm kind of excited to see where that will take the other teams that haven't been selected, especially part-time scientists. Maybe they'll still go to the moon anyway, especially if they do have a launch contract, even if it wasn't verified by the GLXP. So.
Right. And really quickly, just for people who are just tuning in or are unfamiliar with the Google Lunar X Prize, it's a challenge that calls for privately funded spaceflight teams to land privately funded robotic spacecraft and rovers, essentially, on the moon. You have to travel 500 meters. You have to transmit back high definition video and images. And there's a bunch of different extra like little milestones of if you get images from one of the Apollo sites or all of those sorts of things. So that's a general
if you
summary.
can survive a lunar night, which lasts, what is it, like 2 weeks in
14
Earth
days.
time? 14 days?
14 days.
So there you go.
So
Yeah.
that's a big, So the bonus prizes, and if they win the first prize of just being able to land and travel 500 meters and transmit video, they get $20 million. And then there's about $5 million associated to all those different bonus prizes. So,
Very cool.
one new rule too as well. I forgot to mention, I'm sorry we're taking so much time on this, but one new rule is that any of the teams, as long as they launch their mission by the end of this year, 2017, as long as they accomplish it, the following year, and they have their mission launched before the end of this year, then they're still eligible to participate and possibly win the prize. And in the case of Team Indus and Team Hakuto, their mission on the PSLV wouldn't even be launching until December of this year. So it'd be definitely cutting it close, and it would be almost impossible for them to win it otherwise unless they could complete the milestones, in January and February of next year. So, but maybe someone else will get there first. We'll see.
Yeah.
Perfect. So, Jared.
Yes.
Mike has done a lot of talking. Now here's your chance to say something.
I want to show everybody something absolutely mind-blowing, which is something that came out this week, which is that we have directly imaged exoplanets before. So we've imaged planets going around other stars before, but we've never imaged a system of planets before until now. And this is what it looks like when you image a system of planets, and you can notice them just barely moving. And this is the first time a multiplanetary exoplanet system has been imaged directly, and this data was gathered from a 7-year period from 2009 to last year, 2016, by Canada's Hertzberg Institute of Astrophysics and UC Berkeley's Nexus for Exoplanet System Science. This star is called HR 8799, and it's 129 light years away. It's about 60 million years old and about 5 times brighter than our sun is. Now, the reason we could see those 4 planets so easily is because they are larger than Jupiter. All 4 of them are larger than Jupiter, so they're very, very big. The innermost planet orbits once about every 40 years, so it's very, very far out. It's farther out than Saturn would be in our solar system. And then the outermost planet orbits once every 400 years, so that's why the outermost planet over on the left there just barely appears to be moving. But you can see that they are there, and we've actually imaged an exoplanet system, and this is truly one of those things where it's the first time we've ever done this. So there's a lot of things where like, yeah, this is the first time we've ever done this, first time we ever done this. This is really the first time we've ever imaged a multiplanetary exoplanet system directly using telescopes here on Earth. So this is very exciting because you can then figure out where you want to point the James Webb Space Telescope when it's up and operational in 2018 or 2019 in that region, and get even better imagery than what we can get here on Earth. So very exciting stuff, and I was really thrilled to see this announced this week.
The chat room just like blew up with comments on this one. Anomaly saying, I want this as a screensaver. Totally. Mr. Macabar says, has the inner one has a moon?
No, we actually can't detect moons going around exoplanets right now because moons are moons around exoplanets would be smaller than the exoplanets themselves, and it's just very difficult to go through. But there is a team using Kepler data, going through the Kepler data, trying to find exomoons around planets. But so far, nobody has found one.
Awesome. Let's see. We have 6 million a baby. That's
Yeah,
chapter
60 million years old is a baby for a star.
Yeah.
But it is pretty large. You said the innermost planet was a 40-year orbit. I mean, obviously it had like a little sun blocker so that we could image, the exoplanets. But was that star like way more massive than our star, Sol?
That star would be about 50% more massive than our sun is, roughly.
Wow.
So it's a little bit bigger.
Is that all?
So yeah,
it's a big system.
Goodness.
Big baby too.
Big baby. Big baby. That's very, very cool.
Yes.
And yeah, I totally want that as a screensaver too, because that looked really like super trippy. That was awesome.
It's awesome that they did that. I'm still kind of like, I can't believe they did that. So it's great.
Very cool. So Mike,
kind of bring things closer back to home.
A little bit. A little bit. Also kind of exciting. Tell me more.
Yeah, I thought that this was really cool. Boeing on Wednesday of this past week revealed their new spacesuits, or rather their new pressure suits for crew members that are going to be riding on the CST-100 Starliners. And this is Chris Ferguson who is modeling that. The suits are designed with a lightweight fabric, and they also have lighter gloves that have a special material on the fingertips so that they can manipulate touchscreens. Anyone who lives in cold weather knows that whenever you're wearing gloves, you can't really operate your touchscreen phone or your iPad or anything like that with your gloves on unless they have a special material on it. So this way they can manipulate a lot of the new touchscreens that are going into their new glass cockpit for the CST-100. And something else with it is it has a zip-up hoodie instead of a helmet ring with a big helmet, so it should be more maneuverable than the shuttle pressure suits during launch and ascent. So I think that that's really cool, and they definitely look really interesting. And they also, all the valves for the oxygen and gases are right in the front there, so it should be easily accessible. And there's a video as well that I didn't see until late last night on their YouTube page for Boeing that kind of models it a little bit more and shows how easy it is to maneuver around in it. So that's really cool, and I'm excited to see a little bit more of how it holds up and whether or not their data is good and if they're going to have to make any modifications, because I don't know, that would just be really cool. They should sell like jackets like that to the general public that have a zip-up helmet hoodie like that. I would buy that.
It's funny because so the chat room is making a lot of different references to Lego Benny. Because they're getting a lot of like, looks like a Benny ripoff,
Yeah.
looks a little Benny, looks a little Lego. Got it, okay. But one of the questions that came up in the chat room it says, Jessero wants to know why it's the color blue. And Spaceman Sif said, isn't the orange color the NASA suits for rescue purposes so you can see them better in the ocean? Mm-hmm. Do you have any idea why blue was chosen other than Boeing blue and that's cool? Like,
as far as I know, just because they wanted to have it as the Boeing blue. Although blue can be used for emergency services as well. I mean, they had kind of the blue suits in the Gemini program. So, I don't think that there's any like particular reason other than it's the same, color as all of Boeing's fonts and paints and everything like that. So. Yeah. And even in the video, they're just like, I'm proud to be wearing Boeing blue. So it's kind of funny.
I guess that means it sucks for any other aerospace company with a blue logo that wants to do their suits
so much
in
for
blue.
Northrop Grumman
Unless they want to be also Boeing blue. So that'll be interesting.
It'll just have to be off a little bit. It has to be whatever color their blue is.
It's Grumman blue.
Grumman.
Not Boeing blue, Grumman blue.
You're right. So sorry. Jared.
Yes.
Already having questions. People in the chat room are wondering about JWST. Tell me a little bit more about what James Webb Space Telescope is doing.
Sure.
Please.
So there was a story that we covered during our 9th season, which talked about vibration testing and an anomaly occurring during vibration testing on some of the parts of the James Webb Space Telescope. And that December 3rd test generated excessive vibration in a mechanism that holds the stowed portion of the folded mirror. So the two sides that you see right there, they actually will fold out to make the full primary mirror of the James Webb Space Telescope, and there was an excessive vibration with them. Well, that vibration was successfully traced to a locking mechanism, and it has been corrected. So tests have resumed on the multi-billion-dollar Space Telescope in preparation for an October 2018 launch on an Ariane 5. And of course, this, as we like to note, is flying to a Lagrange point 1 million miles away from the Earth. So unlike Hubble, it will not be easily serviced in Earth orbit. You're going to have to go 1 million miles away from the Earth to do that. So basically, everything needs to work.
No big deal. That's kind of space in general, though,
no
right?
No pressure.
It's like,
so
it's fine. It just needs to work.
It's only
the first time.
$8 billion,
right.
I think. So yeah, it's no big deal on having to make that work. So
right.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. That should be fine.
Yes.
That's not a big deal, right?
There you go.
Okay.
Makes me wonder, though, if anything did go wrong with it, if they would mount like an Orion SLS mission to go try to service it or fix it or something like that.
Potentially. It is.
I mean, everything has to go right with that, too.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's being designed to actually be serviced or not. So Unlike Hubble was designed to be serviced. I
Sure.
don't know if James Webb is actually going to be is designed to be serviced or not. I don't know right offhand if it is or not.
Interesting. All right, good to know. And Mike, you got some Dreamchaser news? What's going on there?
Well, just real quick, the Dreamchaser has arrived at NASA Armstrong Flight Research Center to go through a lot of testing, including a drop test from a helicopter. And I just wanted to show this image real quick. It's really cool. I thought it was really awesome, especially the next image here. In the background there, or now the foreground, that's the HL-10. And that was a lifting body that flew from the same base there from July 1966 to November 75. And it's kind of the grandfather of the next step from that was the HL-20, which the Dreamchaser is based off. So I think that was just a really cool shot to show that kind of history. Here's the Dreamchaser coming back to do tests there and getting that really cool shot from when essentially its grandfather in airplane genealogy, let's say. But they're going to be doing a lot of tests there, and hopefully everything goes well to validate the aerodynamic properties, flight software, and the control system for it, and hopefully they don't have any problems with the landing gear this time when they do the drop test, and can move on with the milestones that they need to make on the vehicle for their CRS-2, the Commercial Resupply Services contract, which is going to begin in 2019 for them for Sierra Nevada on their Dreamchaser and go through till at least 2024, hopefully longer than that. So I just thought that was really cool.
No, that's very cool. NASA Jim, apparently in our regular chat room, because I'm kind of bouncing between hosts and regular chat room, is saying that James Webb Telescope is not designed to be serviceable. But then Anomaly says in the chat room that Hubble wasn't actually designed to be serviceable either, which I don't know.
I would contest that.
I wasn't a space geek back in the day, so I apologize.
I would say that it was designed to have new instruments put in it.
Interesting.
So, yeah, or else they wouldn't have those service doors on there. So.
Oh yeah, see that's a really good that's a good thing. Hi.
Hello.
James Webb Space Telescope is substantially further away from where Hubble is, and there's no vehicle that can send humans to JWST for servicing.
Yes.
Whereas with Hubble, we could send the space shuttle at the time up to Hubble to actually service the telescope.
Yep.
So there's that aspect of it as well. There's not to say that we can't design a vehicle in the future to go service James Webb Space Telescope, but basically if we have an anomaly where, like, with Hubble it was out of focus, if that happens with JWST, uh-oh.
Yeah.
We have no plans back. That's it.
Thank you, Ben. That explains that.
Alrighty. Jared, you got some more stuff to tell us.
Yes, I want to show you guys some really cool images, since that seems to be what I do on the show, is show off cool images, which GOES-R, which is now being called GOES-16, has finally reached its perch in geostationary orbit, and it's sending back images from its advanced baseline imager, which look a little something like this. So there's that wonderful, that beautiful blue marble of the Earth. Now, these imaging systems actually generate, the ABI actually doesn't just generate this kind of an image. It generates 16 images, 2 in visible light, 4 in near infrared, and 10 infrared channels. So it does 16 channels, full disk scans of the Earth faster than any other GOES satellite does. Now, it was launched on November 19th on the United Launch Alliance Atlas V in the 541 configuration with a 5-meter payload fairing, 4 solid rocket boosters, and a single-engine Centaur upper stage. Now, this view has a resolution 60 times better than the previous GOES satellites looking at the entire Earth, which will allow for more accurate forecasting and better data for meteorologists. Look at this of North America right here. It's just a fantastic shot. It was a little bit cloudy on that day, but still pretty good looking. Now, what's cool, I didn't know this, is that GOES-16 is actually using the moon to help calibrate itself. So it takes images like this as well, with the moon in the background of the Earth. So and it's using that to train its sensors as to light collection and other things like that. So very cool work that the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and NASA are doing together with that spacecraft.
Very cool.
So cool. Yeah,
really, really
cool.
Awesome. All right, now that you've effectively blown our minds twice in this segment,
You're welcome.
we need a break.
Okay, let's take one.
So we're going to take a short break. I know, right? And when we come back, Ben is going to be back with an interview with the guy we like to call NASA Jim Adams, formerly of NASA. So we'll be right back.
Look into her face, determination in
And welcome back to Tomorrow. My name is Benjamin Higginbotham, coming to you live from Station 204's Observation Lounge. Now, before we get started with our interview with NASA Jim, I did want to give a huge shout out to all of the patrons of Tomorrow who've helped to make this specific segment of this episode happen. These are our Escape Velocity members. They've contributed $10 or more to this specific episode. We've also got our Orbital subscribers. Those are people who've contributed $5 or more. To find out how you can help crowdfunds the shows of tomorrow, head on over to patreon.com/TMRO. All right, we are joined now by Jim Adams, known online as NASA Jim. Jim, you've had this, I'm just going to really cover just a few points of your resume, which your total time in aerospace, 36 years. Total time at NASA, 26 years, starting off at GE Aerospace Division. I want to touch on that in a moment. Then you moved to the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. You were there for 17 years, finally ending up at NASA headquarters for 9 years. That is a very long time in space, and thank you very much for taking time out of your Saturday to come on the show. I'm sure you've got a lot of really fun stories over your decades of experience in aerospace.
I got more stories than you got time.
That is a good problem to have. All right, let's start off with GE Aerospace Division. GE, I think of as General Electric. I don't remember them having a space, like the guys who make my toaster and my refrigerator. They had a space division, or is that a different company completely?
They did. They were some of the very first company. They were one of the very first companies to be in space. And over the course of the 1980s and early 90s, when all of the companies started to merge, GE merged. What GE really wanted from RCA was NBC, but they bought all of RCA and merged the two companies, and then spun off the combined RCA Space Division and the GE Space Division to Martin Marietta Corporation. And then downstream, Martin Marietta and Lockheed combined to form Lockheed Martin, which is just a fantastic space company today, with many divisions across the nation.
And you cut your teeth over at GE. What did you do down there? Was it like an engineering side? What did you do over there?
So I graduated from college with a BS in physics. Mm-hmm. And at the time, the microchip was just coming online and becoming useful. And so I was down the road from a company in Ohio that made cash registers. And so I thought what I wanted to do when I graduated from college was to design electronic cash registers. Back in the mid-'70s, they were still mechanical devices. The first career mistake I made was not recognizing that they'd be hiring electrical and electronic engineers and not physicists. So I ended up having to go with my second choice, which was aerospace. And I was hired into General Electric to do radiation hardening and understanding the radiation effects on the spacecraft that we build, both on civilian spacecraft as well as military. One of the really cool things I did almost right out of college was I was part of a team that took a military satellite out to Nevada, hung it in a vacuum chamber, and blew up a nuclear bomb underneath it.
Not many people get to claim that.
Fortunately, we don't do that today. But yeah, early in the late 70s, early 80s, the Cold War was still going on, and the government was paying companies like General Electric to assure that their satellites would withstand the impacts of or the effects of nuclear blast.
Going back to rad hardening for a moment, we hear a lot about radiation in space, and we might be going back in your timeline a little bit, but sending humans to Mars and radiation, is that going to be as big of a deal as everyone makes it out to be, or is it going to be a thing we need to worry about but not a stopping point?
Yes, it's going to be a big concern, and a lot of it has to do with what we now understand about the radiation environment in space that we didn't understand back when I started. And while the solar wind does produce some radiation, it also shields us from cosmic radiation, which has a much harder, much more severe effect on the human body. And so depending upon the time of the solar cycle that you launch the humans in and how much time they spend in space and how sensitive they are, they could be severely affected by the effects of radiation in space. And so those are big, that's a big challenge, keeping the astronauts alive as they go on to Mars, spend time there because they're not shielded as well at Mars as they would be on Earth, and then come back. So a 3-year exposure is a big deal to an astronaut.
And I know we're diverging a little bit, but International Space Station does have some radiation protection simply because it's still kind of protected by our magnetosphere a little bit. It's not so high up that it's just like out in the middle of space. It actually has a little bit of atmosphere up there still.
That's correct. It's not atmosphere, it's magnetosphere
Sure.
that actually shields you. That's correct. And so the Earth makes a large magnetic field which diverts the solar wind as well as other bits of radiation. Sometimes solar storms get through and the radiation, the cosmic radiation is still higher than it is on the Earth because there's no atmosphere to shield us. But the fact is that the ISS is not the same as flying an 8.5-month journey to Mars.
All right, so you moved from GE to NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center. You're there for just under 20 years. And I know you worked on a series of programs, including Stereo, which is a program that looks at the sun. Actually, there you go. There's a graphical representation of Stereo. Tell me a little bit about your experience at the Goddard Space Flight Center.
Well, that was a place where I had come because of my background in systems engineering that I gained at General Electric. I'd come to work on the International Space Station. We called it Freedom, Space Station Freedom back then. But due to some reorganizing, the work package that Goddard had got terminated. You know, they changed the size of the space station and how they would attach payloads and who was going to manage science and that sort of thing. And so they had me reassigned to do what I knew how to do, which is build satellites. And I got an opportunity to work on several heliophysics types missions. Wind was the first one. We launched that in 1994, and Polar we launched in 1996, and then then I got moved into some Earth resources missions, like it's now called Aura. At that time, we called it EOS Chemistry, and QuickScat, and a number of other missions that I helped out with, and then I was assigned to work on the Stereo mission, which is a pair of spacecraft. Takes two images like the one that was just shown and would combine them so that you could get a three-dimensional view of coronal mass ejections and the solar wind. Of course, we didn't put them in a stable orbit around the sun. They're continuing to drift. And so there was only a period of time of about 2 to 4 years where they were the right separation to do that 3D imaging. And then they continued to go on around the sun. And when they came out of conjunction, Stereo B they were unable to get a lock on Stereo B. I think they've reestablished communications now. There's an interesting story there between Stereo and New Horizons' mission to Pluto. If you're interested, I could tell you that.
Yeah, go ahead. Absolutely.
So both of the missions the primary builder was the Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Lab in Laurel. And they were actually, Stereo and New Horizons, they were built side by side in clean rooms right next door to each other using similar parts. And project manager, he's got his blinders on and he is looking at a mission. He wants the best quality parts he can possibly get so that you don't have problems in space, because you don't send missions you don't send to these kinds of missions, you don't send either robots or humans to service them. So I had bought all of the inertial measurement units that we needed, and there was a parameter that showed that this was going to be like the most perfect inertial measurement unit that we could have gotten. Honeywell, I believe, was the supplier, and in fact that it was going to exceed the mission lifetime by a great deal, which is the kind of margin that as a project manager you want, because then you don't have to really worry about it over the life of the mission. And got a phone call one day, and they said, "Hey, look, the inertial measurement units, same model for New Horizons, is not measuring the same as yours. Yours are better. And so we want to take the ones for stereo and give them to New Horizons, and then you can have the ones from New Horizons, which will still, the predictions say, will still meet your lifetime." And I had my blinders on, had no idea that my future was going to include being the program manager, program director for New Horizons. And stamped my foot a little bit, but finally somebody said, "Put your big hat on, Jim. This is the whole agency you have to think about." And so we did the swap. Stereo went on to have 2 extended missions, and it was just perfect. But then when Stereo B came out of conjunction, one of the inertial measurement units had failed, and that's one of the reasons why it was tumbling. And do you know that was just 1 year before New Horizons arrived at Pluto? Had we put that IMU on New Horizons, they would have had a number of anomalies to deal with that they probably didn't need at that time. I'm not going to say that they would have lost the mission, but sometimes a manager gets it right, in spite of the project manager's whining. So,
but there would have, to be fair, on New Horizons, I have to believe there would be redundant IMUs.
Yeah, that's right.
A pretty important part to the spacecraft, right? So if you lose one, the computer's going to go, "Oh, well, that data's bad," and continue using the good units.
That's exactly right, Ben. So what would have happened, though, is because they would have only had one operating, they may have had to make some operational choices about how close to fly, what kinds of maneuvers to do and when, and they would have had to gone through the whole planning cycle of all of that, which would have just sort of stressed out the flyby team. So it's not, like I said, I won't say that they would have lost the mission, but the fact that the IMU failed on Stereo just sort of confirmed that the right decision was made.
It's also a little bit awesome that you ended up working on New Horizons. So your own decisions earlier helped you. You helped yourself. Your past self help your future self.
So yeah. In fact, can I just take that one step further? When we were launching Stereo, we did this slingshot maneuver around the moon. So we basically put Stereo into a highly elliptical orbit, and we'd get closer and closer to the moon. And then the last time we came up to apogee, the moon was there, and one would sling off this direction, and the other would do a maneuver like that. And so we'd have one kind of out in front of the Earth and the other kind of behind the Earth. Well, the Deep Space Network, when we were at that point, it's a very critical point in the mission, the Deep Space Network was trying to supply us with, I think it was 4 antennas to cover that, a primary and a backup for each of the spacecraft. And that was really stressing out the Deep Space Network. We ended up in a debate for antenna assets with the Cassini mission. And we were told that we had to live, I think it was with 2 antennae and not 4, because there was once-in-a-lifetime science happening at Saturn, and that we must relinquish these antennas to the Cassini mission, and they were going to be taking science at exactly the same time as we were going to be doing this maneuver around the moon. And so we finally figured out how to make it all work, and everything went great, and we didn't hear back from Cassini, so I assumed that they were fine. Stereo was fine. And then my first day on the job, let me see if I got it here. My first day on the job, when I went downtown to work in planetary science, they had this enormous picture. Ignore the text below, but they had this. You've seen this picture before. So the guy who was showing me around NASA headquarters on my first day directing planetary science, which included Cassini, showed me this picture on the wall, and he said, while you guys were arguing with us about DSN assets, this was the image they were trying to take. And if you recall, Ben, that at about 10:30 o'clock and 3/4 of the way out from Saturn, there's a little tiny pale blue dot in this picture. And that's Earth from Saturn. It was one of the first images of Earth we had taken from Saturn with Cassini. And so, sometimes your decisions do come back to bite you.
So, does that happen a lot? Debating over resources, does that happen a lot? Like trying to get deep space network resources, moving assets from one spacecraft to another to figure out what's best for each mission. Is that a common occurrence?
It does, and one of the things you should do sometime is interview one of the executives at JPL that manages the Deep Space Network, which, by the way, is a phenomenal national asset. It doesn't get a lot of praise, but frankly, you don't do missions like Pluto and Cassini and Stereo. And Mars. You don't do them without the Deep Space Network. Every bit of data that we get, every command that controls them, goes through the Deep Space Network, and so there is a limited amount of resources, a limited amount of time that you can use these antennas, and obviously Mars is not in the same direction as the Moon at all times, and Saturn and Jupiter, they're not always in the same direction. So you can't always use a single antenna for multiple spacecraft. And so there used to be, I don't think they do it this way anymore, but there used to be these weekly meetings where the planners for each of the missions would actually get into a room and debate who was going to get which assets and when. And so it was a fairly lively meeting, apparently, and one of those things where missions that actually had the most aggressive planner could get more airtime, essentially.
Green Jim 2 asks, and this is a pretty decent question, sounds like we need more deep space network assets. Are there plans to extend it, or are you aware of anything to expand DSN?
Actually, the Deep Space Network is trying to modernize. They're trying to come into this century. They had this kind of a virtual strategy that said that they didn't need necessarily the same asset all around the world, but they were looking for ways to create a dynamic switch so that the planners could say, I need a contact with Stereo at this time and at this point in space. And then there would be an automated system that would sort of figure that all out and come up with a prioritized list of where to point the assets and when. These are not cheap things. A 32-meter deep space antenna is going to run between $30 and $40 million, and so you don't just sort of pop them up lightly anywhere. On the other hand, they are enablers for the missions, and sometimes the missions are billion-dollar missions, and so these are things that kind of get maybe upgraded by missions along the way. And in fact, the 70-meter antennas that we're famous for, we've got 3 of them around the world, were actually upgraded from smaller diameters as part of, I think it was Voyager, as part of the Voyager mission.
So as we look at, talking data acquisition, that actually segues beautifully over to TDRS, which is Tracking and Data Relay Satellite System, which is used fairly heavily. It was used extensively for shuttle missions. because you can't send your radio signal down through the plasma. So instead, like in Apollo, you'd have the blackout period, and so instead you go up to TDRS and then back down, and that's still used by spacecraft today. And you worked on TDRS as well. Do you have any awesome TDRS stories that go with the stereo stuff?
Well, with TDRS, I was the project manager for the current block of TDRS for such a short period of time. It's more of a career story. It was like I moved from a mission called GPM, Global Precipitation Measurement, which, by the way, launched on an H-2A. It was an amazing ride that they got. But I was moved from GPM to stereo because the agency said, listen, we need you to go be a deputy project manager before you can be a project manager. And at the time I was formulating GPM. So I went from a project formulation manager to a deputy project manager. And then once we finished stereo and we got it launched, they said, okay, here's a project you can work on. It's TDRS. So I was there for about 6 months. And I got a phone call from Mary Cleave at NASA headquarters who said, listen, we'd really like you to come downtown and help with planetary science. And so I had finally achieved what I thought was going to be my career goal, which was be a project manager on a flight project. And somebody said, no, we really want you to come manage programs of projects. And so that's kind of the career story associated with TDRS. It was a fun time working with TDRS because there's some amazing technology there that a lot of people don't know about. It was one of the first times that we used the technology that allows satellites to have direct access. Instead of us calling the satellite from Earth, the satellite could phone home, basically, through TDRS. Some amazing technologies there.
Are we going to need, doesn't TDRS and kind of DSN go together in a way? Not necessarily today, but as we start extending and doing more Mars missions, as we start putting humans on Mars, aren't we going to need to extend both the TDRS and DSN networks to kind of play together so we have this constant line of communication from Earth to Mars?
So yes, and the organization at NASA headquarters that runs TDRS also runs the Deep Space Network and also runs the data network called the Near Earth Network, which is like DSN but for all of the Earth orbiting satellites, and that's the virtual network that they want to pull together. And I'm blanking on the name they had for it, but they had this strategy where we would conduct a virtual switch, and it wouldn't matter whether we were going to use a TDRS or Near Earth Network aperture or a Deep Space Network aperture. The switch would help figure out exactly what was needed for particular missions. But in general, you can think about it. TDRS is a relay satellite that looks down on the Earth, so we can communicate up to geostationary, just like that communication satellite that you mentioned on the H-2A earlier in the broadcast, and then it would reflect that data back down to Earth in some particular location. TDRS, or a DSN, has these very big apertures, which means very narrow beams, and they're designed to be pointed way out into space, into to Mars and the Moon and Venus and Saturn and of course Pluto. And so they're specifically designed for different sorts of mission profiles. Near Earth Network is the same deal. They've got, it turns out that most of our Earth resources satellites are in polar orbits, which means that if you can communicate with them in the polar regions of the Earth, like Antarctica and the Arctic, then you're going to get the most amount of communications time with them on a daily basis. And so we've got some, most of our assets are up above the Arctic Circle on an island in the Arctic Ocean, which somebody probably in the chat room can remind me what the name of the island is. but it's up there, I believe, part of Sweden. Yeah. So.
All right, so you worked on TDRS, then that was at Goddard, and then from there, as you mentioned, you moved over to DC, where you became the Deputy Director for Planetary Science. You touched on a little bit of what that entailed, but now you're looking at a bunch of spacecraft. What does that job title actually entail?
So the way that the Jim Green, I doubt that's the same Jim Green that's in the chat room, but Jim Green and Jim was the director, I was the deputy director, he was the scientist, I was the project manager, engineer type. So Svalbard, there we go, thank you. Jazz Throwout just gave us the right name for the island. He took care of the science, and was the face of the program, and I took care of the programmatics and the engineering side of things. And so together we managed a budget that was at one point in time about an eighth of the agency's budget, $1.5 billion a year. And I can't remember how many assets we had in space at any given point in time, but we had assets in operations, we had missions that were being built, and we had missions that were being proposed. And that ran the gamut from Cassini and New Horizons to all of the Mars rovers, and assuring that the Mars rovers not only operated well, but the Curiosity was going to get built correctly, and as well as things in the middle, like if you recall from a while back, there was this concept to send a boat to Titan. So those sorts of things were all part of the portfolio that I helped to shepherd.
So you mentioned Curiosity. We've actually talked about Curiosity quite a bit before it landed. Were you surprised when the sky crane worked flawlessly, or were you like, nope, all the models showed it would work, I had no doubt in my mind?
So all along, I had extreme confidence in the JPL team. I was very confident that it was all going to work until like the last 24 hours. And then I started to get nervous. I guess maybe cold feet, I'm not exactly sure. But I was pretty confident that the team at JPL had thought of all of the contingencies, and we thought through. There were several independent review teams that had thought things through and knew that we had it right. Obviously, there was a painful delay. We had to delay 26 months because some of the motor actuators were not performing properly, and we were just not going to make the launch window. We made good use of those 26 months to assure that the mission was going to perform just flawlessly, and then it did. And boy, what a relief that was. I can tell you a story about the wheels on the rovers if you're interested.
Yeah, absolutely.
In that. All right. So in the early days of the Curiosity rover, there was an engineering model called Scarecrow, and JPL was running that around the Mars yard at JPL. And I went out to take a look at it, and they were showing me how it was working, and I noticed the tread on the Scarecrow had sort of a herringbone pattern, and then in every rotation, there was in reverse print the letters JPL. And I said, well, what's that? And they said, well, that's a visual indicator, so that we can look back and count the number of visual indicators multiplied by the circumference of the wheel, and we would have a backup way of knowing how far the rover had traveled, because there's no GPS on Mars. And so so I came back, and the guy Doug McQuistion, who worked for Jim Green and I, managing the Mars exploration program, I said to him, listen, I don't want us to leave JPL imprinted all over the surface of Mars. Tell them to change it, make it NASA or USA or Earth or something. And so, yeah, there's the, is that an artist concept, or is that the Scarecrow? That might be the Scarecrow. And so So they did, and what they did was they put in a series of holes, and that was fine. And I didn't hear anything more about it until just before the launch. Pete Warden, who was the center director at Ames Research Center, came to my office, and he's waving this picture, and he says, "Do you know what this is?" And he shows me this picture of one of the wheels, and I said, "Yeah, that's the rover wheel." And he said, "Do you know what those holes are?" And I said, "Yes. Those are the visual indicators so that we can multiply by the number of times the wheel's gone around and the circumference, and we'll know how far it's traveled." He says, "Well, that may be, but those holes are also Morse code for JPL." And so I had been snookered. Still, it makes a great story.
Engineers are tricky that way.
Yeah. Yeah. But one of the really, it was a Mars mission as well that kind of made us aware of the power of social media. We were landing the Phoenix lander in the northern regions of Mars, and there was a science team, and there was a limited number of resources. One of the primary purpose of Phoenix was to determine whether or not what we were seeing from Earth was actually ice. And so it would dig down and it would scoop up a bunch of soil and this white stuff, and we were pretty sure it was water, but we weren't 100% sure. And as one of the scientists said, you have to know it's water, you actually have to taste it. And so we had this device that you would put the soil in and it would heat up, put a sample in, heat up, and then we would analyze the gases on board that were released as a result of heating it up. And you only had a number of pristine cells in this device. And so obviously these were precious measurements, and the science team would debate whether or not this was the sample that you wanted to use to contaminate that cell with, to determine whether or not you were actually seeing water. And of course, there were a lot of scientists there that thought that, of course, it's water. We need to be looking for other things, more organic kinds of compounds. And the device was capable of that. So there was a lot of debate and a lot of tension about whether or not we should be looking for water or if this was the right sample or not. And scientists can be a pretty lively bunch. Well, at the time, we had Twitter was just emerging as a useful communications tool, and Jim Green and I didn't know anything about Twitter, but Mike Griffin, who was the administrator, did, and so there was this science back room, and the scientists were arguing, and some of the younger scientists were twittering out verbatim the debate that was ongoing, and it's like, oh my God, he just called her an SOB, and and that sort of thing, and so one morning Jim Green and I are sitting in his office, and we got this phone call, and it's like, Jim, this is Mike Griffin. Your scientists are making us look bad. Figure out what to do. And so there was a big debate at NASA headquarters to first off figure out what this new social media asset was, and some of the bureaucrats at headquarters said, "You got to find a way to shut this down," and my gut told me that's kind of like the wrong thing to do. We had to find a way to have people tweet responsibly, I suppose was the phrase we were using, and understand where these messages were going and the kind of visibility that you could get from it. Very, very powerful communications tool, especially for science these days, and apparently politicians as well. So that was our introduction to social media, and one of the assignments I had from Green was go figure out what this is, and that's how I ended up with the NASA Jim account on Twitter. And then ultimately Facebook followed.
Did this lead into any of NASA's social media assets at all then, like the public-facing stuff? Because you look at NASA as a government agency, they're one of the best when it comes to social media. They're fantastic at it with tweet-ups and social gatherings and just incredible Twitter posts and beautiful imagery. Is this where that all stemmed out of?
Yeah, well, I won't say that planetary science took 100% credit for that. I mean, the manned space flight program also knew of what the power of social media was, and used it wisely. And so, but yes, I think over time that's where people like Stephanie Sherholtz and others began to conceive of the idea of tweet ups. And in science, anyway, Juno was the first tweet up for NASA science. And of course, Juno was one of my missions, and I was a big proponent of the Juno, and then ultimately the Grail tweet ups. And they're now called socials, of course. So, so what I've got, Ben, is from the Juno mission, because that's really where that all started, is I've got a couple of stickers, decals. This is the Juno, so I'm looking at the wrong screen here. This is the Juno decal for launch, and then they reissued it just last year for the arrival at Jupiter. And so what we'll do a little later on is I'm told I can enter a code into the chat room and select somebody at random, and we'll send them these stickers from Juno. There was the social media story about Juno was I was in an elevator. You know, they always tell you should have your elevator speech. And this was before I had easy access to Charlie Bolden, and I was in an elevator with Charlie at a stamp unveiling for Mercury at Kennedy Space Center, and I turned to him and I said, "Look, the next shuttle landing is the last human space flight event, and forgive me for not remembering the STS number of that." And I said, "The very next thing is the Juno launch," and I said, oftentimes you'll get 100,000 or 500,000 people out for a shuttle event, and for STS 135, thanks, and for an unmanned launch, we may only invite less than 1,000 people, and most of those don't even show up. And so I said, what do you think about? I said to Charlie, what do you think about setting a goal to have 10,000 people attend the next thing after the end of the premier human spaceflight program? And he was outrageously excited about it. To use a phrase, he's over the moon. And that's where Juno 10K came from. So we began pushing that on social media and in press advisories that we were shooting for 10,000 people to attend Juno, and as part of that, we held a tweet up out at Kennedy Space Center. We erected a tent and had air conditioners and that sort of thing, and got a lot of press for Juno that way. We had, I believe it was 12,000 people show up to Juno that day. It was very hot, as I recall, in August. It was over 100 degrees. And the metrics were an amazing thing. We had never really fully understood what the reach of Twitter could really be until we started playing with Juno and the tweet ups and that sort of thing. Social media is extremely powerful.
Juno was a pivotal point for us as well. You actually, I believe it was you personally, actually invited us when we were back at Space Vidcast to go down and interview some of the scientists, and we actually got to see Juno on the ground. And this was one of the first times we got to go in as official people and do some incredible things. And it was just an awe-inspiring moment for us. It was very, very cool to be able to see the spacecraft on the ground, which we'd never seen before, and talk to the people that were working on it and see their enthusiasm and their, I don't want to say apprehension at launch. I mean, they weren't scared, but it was definitely a, let's get it going, let's get it happening, and it was very, very cool. And I feel like that was kind of as NASA was reshifting itself into social and kind of testing the waters with what it could do. It was very cool.
Yeah, and I think Juno was hallmark in that whole strategy that started treating social media, organized social media, as media rather than as
the scum of the earth,
space gates and that sort of thing. Yeah. So hey, here's what I'm going to do, because I got another thing I want to give away as well that's associated with Juno. I'm gonna randomly press the code here, and we will see who the winner is of the Juno decals of the 126 users that are in the room at the moment. And then that should go to
Lars von Braun.
Lars von Braun. So somebody will contact Lars and ask for his postal address and stuff. And we will we'll send those off.
One of the advantages of watching the show live, you could win stuff randomly. Very cool. Absolutely.
So you were talking about the nervousness associated with launch.
Yeah.
I went through my swag box and I found this. Let's see if we can get a good picture of it. This is a launch coin produced by ULA that gave us a perfect launch on Juno. And this is the Juno launch coin that ULA had minted as a result of that. And so as we talk a little bit in about 5 minutes or so, we'll pick somebody else and we'll mail that off to them as well. So
that'll be awesome. And actually, you mentioned treating social media differently. That's actually very valid. We firsthand experienced that with NASA, specifically Kennedy Space Center. We tried and tried for, I don't remember, it was a year and a half, to just get down and be allowed to shoot a launch, just to be allowed on site. And it was groups like you and actually Miles O'Brien and a few others with the help of DC, because Kennedy Space Center was like, no, they are not real media, absolutely not. And so we literally had to bring it to NASA DC and say, no, we do have a real audience here. We have people excited about this. And that was the turning point, I think, for NASA. And it was right around that Juno time. It was it was kind of it wasn't like it just flipped. It was like I would say a 1 to 2 year process, at least from our side. And it was quite amazing.
I agree. It was a great time, and it was also a time frame when commercial spaceflight, no pun intended, was taking off, and so to have social media and commercial spaceflight become part of the aerospace family rather than stepchildren, I think that was really important in terms of creating a relevance for what's going to happen in the future in aerospace, the journey to Mars, Elon's vision, NASA's vision. It almost doesn't matter. It's a vision that says humanity is going to move out beyond. And I think I think we need social media. We need commercial spaceflight in order to make that sort of thing happen.
So you mentioned you didn't have very good access to Charlie Bolden at that time, but then we actually just a little bit earlier we saw a picture of you right next to Charlie. There we go, directly next to Charlie. Pretty good access right there. And I assume that's when you moved up to the deputy chief technologist. Easy for me to say at NASA. What did that job entail?
So I love this picture. Before we go on to that, I love this picture. It's taken by Bill Engels, and it was the Grail launch. And a lot of people on social media accused me of showing, that's actually, in the middle of the countdown, but they were accusing me of showing Charlie how to play Angry Birds. So.
Were you?
No, the reality was that I'm trying to remember which rocket. I think they were, that's video cameras from around KSC that we were looking at, and we were in a long hold on Grail waiting for the weather, and what we were actually looking at was the erection of the I believe it was the MSL launch vehicle on the Atlas vertical integration facility. So those were fun times.
MSL being the Mars Science Laboratory.
Yeah, Curiosity rover now. Yeah. So I had been asked prior to that time frame, the 2010, 2011 time frame, to consider going and working as the deputy chief technologist for the agency, and twice I said no because I said to Bobby Braun, then the chief technologist of the agency, I got all of these launches coming up, these scientific discoveries are happening, we're changing how we look at the universe every single week, something new's coming out. I said, would you leave all of this? And Bobby said to me, no, he wouldn't. And then after we launched Juno and Grail successfully, I got a phone call from the deputy administrator. At that time, it was Lori Garver, and she said, listen, we really need you to come do this technology job. And I said, well, okay, it's the third time, and it's kind of a big deal person that's asking, and so I agreed to go do that. In everybody's career, there's a sweet spot. And now looking back, I would say planetary science was the sweet spot. I enjoyed my time as deputy chief technologist, but I don't think anything holds a candle to the things that we were able to do in planetary science.
What's your favorite moment in planetary science? Your favorite, like, you got to define this one time. What would it be?
Goodness, there were so many, but I would have to say landing on Mars. So much energy went into that. And it wasn't just the Curiosity, it was the Phoenix lander as well. Getting our footprint robotically on another planet just spoke volumes to me. And then to be a part of thinking about what the vision and the future would be was one of those things that you just really can't replace. But I have to say, there were emerging technologies that are just going to change the future, and not only for spaceflight but also for life on Earth. And to have been a part of helping to develop those and promote those, and encourage the agency to move from tried and true, don't bring me new technology because it's a risk, to being willing to take an acceptable risk. That was a privilege as well.
Are you seeing that shift in NASA right now continuing? Are you seeing, is the NASA that you started at, 25, 26 years ago, a very different NASA than what we have today?
Yes, and it's largely, I think, because the technology enables the engineers to be as creative as they possibly can. And I'm sure there's more creativity to tap into, but when I started at NASA, we had ways that we did things, and heaven help you if you should introduce a new kind of code to something, a new modeling, or then there were all kinds of processes that you'd have to go through. In fact, even as late as Juno, something today that we take for granted. This was 3D printed. This was a concept mission that was going to go to the moon before they canceled Constellation. Something as simple as 3D printing, still, even during the Juno days, was embryonic in terms of real hard applications. And so there's a story about, I'm sitting in the chief technologist's office and I'm looking at these waveguide brackets that had been 3D printed out of titanium. And I thought, oh, hey, those are pretty cool. And at the time it was Bobby Braun or Mike Gazarek, I think. And he said to me, yeah, those are flying on Juno. And I said, oh, really? And so the next time I ran into my Lockheed Martin folks, who just did an excellent job building Juno, I said, I saw these waveguide brackets that were supposedly 3D printed, and I didn't know anything about that. And they all kind of got like sheepish looks on their faces, and they had actually 3D printed out of titanium the waveguide brackets on Juno. because it was going to save time and money, and they chose to do it under the radar because they knew full well that NASA would want them to start doing engineering analyses and make 100 of these things and cut them all up and all that kind of stuff. But they were confident that they were going to work because they had done the right kinds of analyses, and so they just flew it under the radar and didn't tell us. I got to figure out how to shut my Skype down here because it's pinging. But but that was just back in 2010, 2011 timeframe. Today, the guys out at JPL can 3D print. This is a single print. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong screen. This is a fabric this happens to be made out of steel, but I've seen it in plastic and titanium as well. It's got a smooth surface on this side, and then I don't know if you can see the interlocking here. It's almost like chain mail.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. It's almost like 8-bit chainmail, right?
You cannot make this without 3D printing in metal. It just doesn't happen. And so we're enabling innovation and creativity. So somebody may say, well, what are you going to use it for? We don't know exactly yet, but there is something useful for having done this. 3D printing structures in space, maybe, or I don't know if you know this or not, but New Horizons had a layer of Kevlar to protect it from debris as it went through the Pluto system. Maybe we'll be making armor for deep space probes this way in the future. But this was actually a gift at my retirement party because I was such a proponent of that. JPL gave me that as a gift.
And you mentioned your retirement party. Do you you no longer work at NASA? Do you miss it?
I do. Yeah. I think the opportunity and the vision of the agency is just prime for continuing to move forward. I think we're now to the point where we can start talking about Orion and SLS and actually sending human beings to places that we just have only talked about for years. And so it's going to be, the last half of this decade is just going to be awesome, especially from a human spaceflight standpoint. Presuming that the new administration makes space a priority. And I noted that we got at least a couple of words in the inaugural speeches. So hopefully that will continue.
And that leads nicely to a question from Chris Radcliffe, which is a career at NASA something you'd recommend young scientists to young scientists and engineers these days?
Yes, I would say that the best thing to do, at least for me, I went and I got 10 years cutting my teeth in the space industry, and then I made a conscious choice to leave industry and go work for NASA. That conscious choice has a cost associated with it because typically that's the point in your career where your salary and in the commercial environment starts to grow a great deal faster than it does as a civil servant. But if you feel compelled to be a part of the space agenda for our government and really for the world, then NASA is the place to make that happen. And there's something to be said, even if you're not earning, the kinds of salaries that you can get from the larger aerospace corporations. There's something to be said for driving the truck.
Now that you're retired, what are you up to?
What am I up to? So I have a period of time where I'm really not allowed to work for NASA, but I have set up a small consulting business, and I'm working on developing a client base to do things like independent reviews and consult on proposals and that sort of thing, because of my perspective. In the meantime, I have developed a skill in public speaking and science communication. And so I have been asked by a number of organizations to come and speak. And so the first month after I retired, I took off for South Africa, and I did a 20-lecture, 8-city tour, speaking to high school kids, speaking to the public, speaking to industry and government officials about the benefits of investing in space and art. Space as art. I did an introduction to the electromagnetic spectrum, a variety of things. And it turns out that in March I'm going to go back and I'm going to do it again. So that's going to be a fun thing to do at the same time while I'm trying to build a commercial clientele.
That sounds pretty incredible. Is it working? Are kids start getting excited? You go, you talk to them about STEAM, it sounds like, science, technology, engineering, art, math. Are they getting excited and going, yes, this is something I want to get into?
Always. It almost doesn't matter if they ultimately end up working for NASA or even in aerospace. What matters is that you encourage them to stay in school. You encourage them to focus on math, to focus on the intersection between math and art is really, I think that's going to be one of the emerging skills of our children in the future. And to apply those things, to apply their brain to the problems that the world faces. And we've got plenty of problems for people to solve. So.
All right, before we go into break, you have one more thing to give out, although the chat room requests that you give away the 8-bit chainmail. I don't think that's going to happen. You said it was made out of titanium.
Actually, this happens to be steel.
Oh, yep, okay.
But I have seen versions of it in titanium and in typical 3D printed plastic as well. So.
It looks incredible on screen. But yeah, one more if you want to send that through the chat room. Again, another reason to watch live, not just on demand. You get to ask questions and free swag.
So, Chris Radcliffe.
Congratulations, Chris. There you go.
There you go. So somebody will contact both of you and get your particulars and forward them to me, and I'll drop those in the mail next week sometime.
So, Jim, if people want to find you online, or if they want to hire you to speak at wherever they may have for some sort of STEAM type event, where can they find you?
Facebook. It turns out to be the new business tool. Huh. So if you just go in and you type NASA Jim Adams, you'll find me almost immediately.
You have some incredible stories. I hope we can bring you back on in the not too distant future to talk. I'm sure we only hit the tip of the iceberg on all of this, but absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for taking time out of your Saturday to come on the show. Really appreciate everything you've done for us.
Oh, thank you. And I've been a fan of Space Vidcast and now Tomorrow ever since you guys got started and since the Juno days. And so hopefully that will continue and it'll go well for you this orbit round.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, comments from last week's show. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
We've always looked to the stars. They guide us, give us comfort, help us find our way. We see ourselves out there. When we look up, it inspires us. And we long for something we don't yet know. We yearn to go there. So, we venture forth.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. It's one small step for man, one please, for me, guys.
The exploration of space will go ahead, whether we join in it or not.
Many think we stopped exploring. But we know our journey didn't end. We've only just begun.
Orion is functioning perfectly at this point.
Come with us and explore tomorrow.
And welcome back to Tomorrow. Now, before we get into comments from last week's show, huge shout out to everyone who makes this particular episode possible. These are Escape Velocity members. They contribute $10 or more to this specific episode. We've also got our Orbital subscribers. There are people who've contributed $5 or more to this specific episode. At Orbital, you also get access to free worldwide shipping from our swag store. And then we've also got our sub-Orbital subscribers. At this level, this is $5. What is this? I've lost my place. This is $2.50 or more. At this level, you get access to After Dark as soon as it's made available online, and of course your name in the show. And we've got our ground support crew. These are people who've contributed $1 or more to this specific episode. Every single penny, every single dollar helps. Thank you so much to everyone on all of these lists. Hopefully you're able to find your names. We keep getting so many more subscribers, and the fonts unfortunately get smaller, but it means a lot to us, and it really helps the show. To find out how you can help crowdfund the shows of tomorrow, head on over to patreon.com/TMRO. I've just learned that one of the things that those Patreon funds are going to be purchasing are some sound-absorbing panels on these walls, because when I shout, I can hear it bounce back into my own ear. All right, Capcom. Comments from last week. Oh, what did we have last week? It was Dennis. Oh, that's right, I wasn't here.
Yeah, we weren't here. That's why
yeah.
I have no idea what's going on.
We had Dennis Wingo.
Yes. Also, really quickly, Jim had another Juno patch to give away and gave that away during the break. So
Watch live.
I love guests who know how to run our technology. This is really cool. I will say Jim's interview is probably my favorite of all time for this show.
As was the chat room.
Yeah, that was fantastic. We normally do the 5 questions at the end, but we ran so long. Now I know we're a web show, so we can do whatever we want, but there's a point where you can't go forever. So yeah, we skipped those. I'm hoping we can bring him on again in the future and continue telling great stories, because that was incredible. And we'll get to his 5 questions at that time. All right, Capcom. Last week it was Dennis Wingo going back to the moon right this time. You and I weren't here, but you guys took that show.
Yes.
So you'll help us out with
So
these
much fun to be like,
Great.
hi, it's me. Hi, me again. Hi, still me, right?
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Just,
Oh, that's right. 2 weeks ago. I wasn't here for 2 weeks, was I? Yeah, no, 2 weeks
It's just
ago.
a whole lot of like, sorry, still my talking head. I apologize.
hi for the 3rd time.
Yep.
All right, Capcom, get us started.
This one comes from Falcon7350 off of YouTube. I think a test run to the moon would be a great test for SpaceX before their run to Mars.
I can't really
too.
comment on any of that. You guys?
Well, I remember at one point, and I think this was before even Falcon 9 even started flying, Elon did have ideas for, I guess, what they would have called a gray dragon to land the Dragon capsule with the Draco thrusters on the moon first before trying to attempt it onto Mars. But I think that idea never really got pushed forward into any sort of development phase. But that would be very cool to see them do test missions on the moon first. And if any sort of anything popped up like the European Space Agency's Lunar Village, it would be awesome for SpaceX to do cargo missions or something like that and make extra money for their ambitions to go to Mars with their interplanetary transport system.
Yeah, and I feel like depending upon how much fuel you use with the Super Dracos as well, you could turn the Dragon into a hopper vehicle where it can, take off and fly somewhere else again. And that would be really important to do comparative analysis of the surface of the moon.
A lunar emergency rescue vehicle.
Ooh.
LERV.
No.
LERV.
No. Not into it.
No, we got to work on the work on the marketing on that one. That's no good.
Yeah.
It's not a LERV.
Redundant lure.
Marketing's come back. They said you need to change the name.
Right. Not into that one, sorry.
All right, Capcom, next up.
Next one.
Someone needs to add LURV into the TARS chat room system.
Just call it Lard and have it end with dragon.
LARD? Lunar Autonomous Rescue Dragon?
Yeah. Lard.
Remember how I wanted to make shirts per episode? I think LURV on the front and Lard on the back. Yeah.
Oh man.
I'm not wearing anything that insinuates that I'm fatter than I already am. Okay, so next question. Sorry. Next comment comes off of YouTube.
I have derailed the show.
Yes, you have.
All right.
This is why we don't have you on. 2001 list.
Go.
I know, I can't.
You got him to start.
I know. I can't read it now. 2001 Lex to Lioness?
Lex to Linus. Lex, yeah, that seems about right.
Lextilionus. In the interest of passing on information, the Japanese do not use a countdown. Instead, they use a count up and launch on 10.
Nice.
That's
Interesting.
That's really exciting. If you think about it, it'd be like 1, 2, 3.
That's what my parents did. A lot of count ups with me when I was a child.
Yeah, that was for you standing in the corner and that's totally
Actually,
different.
this is an interesting thing of how different space agencies count down or up to their, like, in the United States, generally speaking, 0 is the moment you lift off the pad, but that's not when your engines ignite, right?
No.
You ignite your engines however
Sure,
much
but you
time
get down
prior.
to like 1 and liftoff. But then there's a different agency
ESA,
that's like
Ariane Space, I'm
0
sorry,
plus 1 plus 2 plus 3, and I'm like, what is happening right now?
Yeah, Ariane Space, they light their engine at 0, but then
Right.
they're still on the pad for what, 8 more seconds? Is that about right? 6 to 8 seconds? Mike, you might know.
It really depends. Depends on the mission, but yeah, it's interesting how both Ariane Space and India, the Indian Space Research Organization, also do the count up, and sometimes it takes off at like +4, +8. It just really depends on which rocket they're using.
Gives me so much anxiety.
Even Russia with the Soyuz, even with Soyuz, it doesn't actually lift off the pad until a couple seconds after. They've counted down after 0.
So Dan TC24 in the chat room says we use the von Braunian method, which is, I believe, correct, right? The 0 being liftoff is the von Braunian way of doing it. I actually prefer that because then you know, right?
That's the start of
that's the liftoff is the thing, right? That's what you're going for. So if at +1 you haven't done anything yet, something be wrong. So anyhow.
Right. Citizen Big
I prefer you may launch when ready. All right, next
After
up.
you, sir. The next one comes off of YouTube. This one comes from Jet Quasar, which I'm totally sure is a legal name. You always have great guests, but I find myself agreeing 100% with everything Dennis Wingo has said. I certainly hope he's right about the direction of NASA over the next few years, and James Tiberius Kirk is the best name for a cat ever.
That was amazing.
That was amazing. But then I was talking, Ben and I were, we weren't not here. We were in Florida, and we were trying to tune into the show because we realized you guys were on. And it was right around that time when like the cat had jumped up onto his shoulder kind of thing. And I was like, what's going on? Ben's like, I don't know, I think it's a cat. And we hear, meow. And I'm like, what is, oh, that's James Tiberius Kirk. And I'm like, wait, no, seriously, what is happening right now?
Anarchy.
It was. It's like, oh, that is so amazing.
It was a really fun show.
When mom and dad are away, the cat will play.
Yeah, apparently.
Exactly.
Clearly. No, that was good stuff. It was fun. It was really great to be able to tune in from that far away. And even though it may have sounded like that was a little chaotic to you or what have you, but you guys did a really great job. And it was a fun moment to kind of to have. And Dennis is great. Dennis is a great interview. He's always has something interesting to say, no matter what.
He's fun.
Yeah, totally. Good job.
I love how you make it seem like you were just casually just like, oh yeah, isn't our show on right now? You want to watch that?
No, because with the time, this is going to sound really bad. I am not as good with time zones as Benjamin James over here, and
because I just live in Universal Time.
Right. So
everything
I
do is in UTC.
I'm like, hey, are they on? They're on right now, right? Like we should probably try and tune in. Well, that and like bandwidth where we were was not super amazing. So that was kind of another issue with that. Was like, I don't know, can you get on? Do you have signal? I have 3 dots. Do you have 4 dots? I don't know. Hold. It was one of those like, can you hear me now situations. Is this sort of how it felt? So at least we heard some things going on. Had to watch it after the fact like most people.
All right, next up.
Next comment comes off of Reddit. This one comes from Brandon Mark, that I always call Brandon Mac for some reason. I apologize. Here's an awe-inspiring thought. Whatever we'll see of KIC and I almost said N 9, 8, 3, 2, 2, 2, 7.
Okay, you sound like an automated phone system.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's what I was going for.
8,
Thanks, movie phone.
3, 2, 2, 2.
Right.
7.
Right. 5 years from now.
Is this your number?
Actually happened during the reign of the ancient Roman Empire, since Star Pair is about 1,800 light years away.
Yep.
I almost said 18,000. I'm really bad with numbers, you guys. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Yeah, right.
Anyway, so that is really cool. That is a really interesting thought. It's like whatever we see 5 years from now, we're seeing into the past, which is such a crazy.
Astronomy is like the one way you can actually do time travel. So.
Yeah, every telescope is a time machine.
That's right. That's a good point, Mike.
It's a way better shirt than lard.
Every telescope, I don't know. Lard is a pretty good shirt.
Lard. No.
Orbit 1004, Lard.
Just lard.
How many of you would buy an Orbit 1004 Lard shirt? I'm just curious.
I would only buy it if it says, I'm larded.
Next up. Next up.
Oh, boy.
All right, last comment for this particular show comes off of YouTube from Stephen Thompson. Probably the fastest way to get to Congress behind NASA returning to the moon will be China landing on the moon. Saving face politically probably trumps little things like saving the environment or moving heavy industry off the planet. Probably. Right? That's how we got
so
there
awesome
the first
to have
time.
space race with China. Oh,
Yeah, right? Like,
so awesome.
Carl Sagan. Just as like random shouts about Carl Sagan in our chat room going on right now.
I just realized I never fixed the clothes. I saw him loaded up in preview. And I'm like,
I am standing on a box.
he's gonna, so before we go into After Dark, I will show you, she mentioned prior to us being gone for the last couple weeks or whatever it was, that she felt too short around everyone, so let's just,
It was a little bit better when it was just Mike and I, but I realized I was even looking up at the screen like this, and I'm like, oh man, I'm tiny.
So let me,
sucks.
Dutta in that same day just built her this, which is all sorts of amazing.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So
Yep.
she just stands on that. All sorts of TV magic,
There
right?
you go.
There you
Wow.
It's so great.
Makes a difference,
Amazing.
even though.
go. All right, everyone.
It makes a huge amount of difference.
It does. I'd like to thank everyone so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this week's show. Leave your comments on our YouTube channel, Facebook, or Twitter, wherever you'd like, so we can bring them into next week's shows. Next week's show is going to be Dave Dissler. We're going to get an update on the Impossible Drive, the EM drive.
Another fan favorite.
Another fan favorite. No, it's going to be cool because there's more data that came out, kind of a actual, like, I believe it's a peer-reviewed paper now at this point.
I like data.
Yeah, it's data. So we're going to get an update on that EM drive. For
We'll
those
talk
of you
about
watching
numbers
live,
and stuff.
stay tuned. After Dark is up next. For everyone else, it'll be available in about 4 weeks. Thank you so much. See you next week.